Life is full of tiny annoyances, traffic, delays, misunderstandings, messy moments. But what if the key to a happier, calmer life isn't fixing everything, but choosing what's worth your energy? Don't sweat the small stuff reminds us that most of the things stressing us out today won't matter tomorrow, next week, or even an hour from now. With simple insights and gentle wisdom, this book teaches you how to slow down, breathe, and let go of the little things that steal your peace. Because when you stop sweating the small stuff, life starts feeling a whole lot bigger, lighter, and more meaningful. Overview and core philosophy: don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Published in 1997 by Dr. Richard Carlson. Became a cultural phenomenon and one of the best-selling self-help books of all time. Spending about 100 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list and selling more than 15 million copies worldwide. The book's central message is elegantly simple yet profoundly transformative. Most of what causes us stress, anxiety, and unhappiness in daily life consists of relatively minor issues that we magnify through our reactions and perspectives. By learning to keep these small frustrations in proper perspective, we can live with greater peace, joy, and fulfillment. The book consists of 100 brief chapters, each typically just 2 to 3 pages long, offering specific, actionable strategies for reducing stress and cultivating inner calm. Dr. Carlson, a psychotherapist and stress management expert, writes in an accessible, conversational style that makes profound wisdom feel approachable and immediately applicable to everyday situations. The underlying philosophy draws from mindfulness, Buddhist teachings, and modern psychology to create a practical guide for living more peacefully in our incredibly hurried, stress-filled modern world. The central premise: perspective is everything. The foundational insight of the book is captured in its title. Virtually everything that stresses us out is, in the grand scheme of life, relatively small stuff. We spend enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy worrying about things that won't matter in a week, a month, or certainly a year from now. Carlson argues that our stress doesn't come primarily from external circumstances, but from how we react to and interpret those circumstances. When we learn to respond to life's challenges with more ease and perspective rather than automatic reactivity, problems that once seemed insurmountable begin to feel more manageable. Even truly significant stressors become less overwhelming when we've developed the habit of not amplifying minor irritations into major crises. The book teaches that by changing our relationship to problems and developing new habits of perspective, we can experience dramatic improvements in our quality of life without necessarily changing our external circumstances. This shift from reaction to conscious response represents the core transformation the book offers. Making peace with imperfection, one of the earliest and most important lessons, involves accepting imperfection as a natural part of life, rather than something to constantly fight against. Carlson observes that the need for perfection and the desire for inner tranquility fundamentally conflicts with each other, because perfectionism creates constant disappointment and stress. When we insist that ourselves, other people, and systems function perfectly, we set ourselves up for perpetual frustration, since perfection is virtually impossible to achieve or maintain. The paradox Carlson presents is that eliminating the need for perfection actually allows us to discover perfection in life itself, to appreciate things as they are rather than constantly judging them against impossible standards. This applies to ourselves, where self-criticism and harsh judgment prevent us from experiencing peace, and to others, where expecting perfection damages relationships and creates resentment. Making peace with imperfection doesn't mean lowering standards or accepting mediocrity, but rather recognizing that excellence can coexist with human imperfection, and that our worth doesn't depend on flawless performance. This shift alone can dramatically reduce daily stress and increase life satisfaction. Living in the present moment, a recurring theme throughout the book, emphasizes the importance of living in the present moment rather than constantly dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. Carlson explains that most of our stress comes not from what's actually happening right now, but from our thoughts about what might happen or what has already happened. The present moment, when we fully inhabit it, is almost always manageable and often quite pleasant. But we miss this by mentally time-traveling to scenarios that aren't actually occurring. The practice of bringing attention back to the here and now interrupts the snowball effect of stressful thinking, where one worry triggers another until we're completely overwhelmed by mental scenarios that may never materialize. Carlson offers practical techniques for cultivating present moment awareness, including setting aside quiet time daily for meditation or simple stillness, focusing on one task at a time rather than multitasking, and noticing when the mind has wandered into anxiety-producing thoughts about past or future. He reminds readers that life isn't an emergency, a phrase worth repeating to ourselves when we feel rushed and pressured. When we're truly present, we discover that most moments contain peace and even beauty that we typically miss in our mental busyness. The Snowball Effect of Thinking, Chapter 4, introduces the crucial concept of the snowball effect, explaining how our thinking patterns can either spiral into increasing stress or remain calm depending on our awareness. Carlson describes how one negative or worried thought naturally leads to another related thought, which triggers another, creating momentum that's increasingly difficult to stop, much like a snowball rolling downhill that grows larger and faster. The more absorbed we become in the details of whatever is upsetting us, mentally rehearsing conversations or imagining worst-case scenarios, the worse we feel and the more insurmountable our problems appear. The key to preventing this destructive pattern is catching it early, noticing when thoughts are beginning to spiral and consciously choosing to redirect attention before significant momentum builds. This requires developing the observer part of ourselves that can step back and watch thoughts without automatically believing or following them. Carlson emphasizes that we don't need to suppress or fight negative thoughts, which often makes them stronger, but rather simply notice them without attaching additional thoughts and emotional energy. This practice of thought awareness prevents molehills from becoming mountains in our minds and allows us to respond to actual problems with clarity rather than emotional reactivity amplified by cascading worried thoughts. Developing compassion and kindness, both for ourselves and others, as a fundamental path to reducing stress and increasing happiness. Carlson explains that when we open our hearts to others through genuine compassion, we paradoxically feel better ourselves, because compassion connects us to something larger than our personal concerns and worries. Random acts of kindness, done without expectation of recognition or reward, create a special type of joy that materialism and self-focus can never produce. He encourages readers to practice specific acts, telling 3 people daily how much we love them, complimenting at least one person daily about something we genuinely admire, spending a moment each day thinking of someone to thank, and performing secret acts of service that no one ever knows about. The chapter on sponsoring a child through the mail highlights Carlson's belief that service and generosity should be integral parts of our lives, not occasional afterthoughts. These practices work, not because they're obligatory or virtuous, but because they fundamentally shift our focus from what's wrong or lacking to what's beautiful and worthy of appreciation. Compassion also means looking beyond behavior to see the innocence and inherent worth in all people, recognizing that everyone is doing the best they can with their current level of consciousness. In circumstances, even when their behavior is problematic or hurtful, letting go of being right. Several chapters address the enormous stress relief that comes from releasing the need to be right and from letting others have the glory. Carlson observes that most arguments and conflicts arise not from genuinely important issues, but from egos, insistence on being right and having others acknowledge our correctness. He suggests an experiment. The next time you find yourself in an argument, rather than defending your position, try agreeing with criticism directed toward you or genuinely trying to see the other person's point of view first. The results are often miraculous, as the argument loses its fuel and simply disappears. This doesn't mean you're admitting you're wrong or abandoning your genuine convictions, but rather choosing peace over the empty satisfaction of winning an argument. The chapter titled "Choose Being Kind Over Being Right" encapsulates this wisdom, beautifully noting that when you choose kindness, you're actually right every time, because preserving relationships and peace is more important than being proven correct about some minor issue. Letting others have the glory means not always needing to be the star, the expert, or the person who gets credit, but instead finding satisfaction in supporting others' success and allowing them to shine. This cultivates a quiet, inner confidence that's far more substantial than the fragile self-esteem that depends on constantly proving oneself superior to others. Your in-basket won't be empty. When You Die, Chapter 6, presents one of the book's most memorable insights. When you die, your in-basket won't be empty, so you might as well accept that reality now and stop treating every task as urgent. This powerful reminder helps us recognize that the pursuit of completion is endless and ultimately futile because there will always be more to do. More emails to answer, more projects to finish. The purpose of life isn't to complete everything on our to-do lists, but to enjoy each step of life's journey with love, presence, and appreciation. In reality, almost everything can wait, and truly urgent emergencies are actually quite rare, despite our tendency to treat ordinary tasks as though lives depend on them. This perspective allows us to prioritize more wisely, understanding that relationships, experiences, and presence matter far more than an empty inbox or a perfectly organized desk. Carlson encourages readers to regularly ask themselves, will this matter a year from now, as a filter for determining what genuinely deserves our time and emotional energy. Most of what we stress about fails this test, revealing itself as small stuff that we're sweating unnecessarily. This doesn't promote irresponsibility or laziness, but rather conscious choice about where to invest our limited time and energy in ways that actually align with what matters most. Patience and lowering stress tolerance counterintuitively. Carlson suggests lowering our tolerance to stress rather than trying to handle more stress better. This means recognizing stress earlier and responding to it before it accumulates rather than priding ourselves on how much pressure we can endure before breaking. He introduces patience, practice periods, where we deliberately choose situations to practice patience, such as selecting the longest line at the grocery store or purposely driving in the slow lane, using these moments as opportunities to develop this crucial quality. Becoming more patient is presented not as a moral imperative, but as a practical strategy for reducing personal stress, since impatience creates its own suffering. The chapter on becoming a less aggressive driver illustrates how much unnecessary stress we create through impatience in situations completely outside our control. Spending emotional energy raging at traffic rather than accepting what is, and using the time for calm reflection or simply breathing. Carlson notes that we become what we practice most. So if we're constantly practicing impatience, irritation, and stress responses, those become our default modes. Conversely, when we practice patience, presence, and calm responses even in small situations, we're training ourselves to respond that way in larger challenges as well. Separate realities. An understanding concept of separate realities helps explain why people see situations so differently and why conflicts arise from these differences. Carlson explains that everyone experiences life through their own unique lens shaped by their history, beliefs, mood, and perspective, meaning that what seems obviously true or important to us may appear completely different to someone else. Neither perspective is necessarily wrong. They're simply different realities, based on different viewpoints. Understanding this reduces the tendency to judge others harshly for not seeing things our way, and decreases conflicts that arise from insisting there's only one correct way to interpret a situation. Seek first to understand reinforces this by encouraging us to genuinely try to understand others' perspectives before insisting they understand ours, a practice that transforms communication and relationships. When we approach disagreements with curiosity about the other person's reality rather than determination to prove them wrong, conversations become collaborative rather than combative. This ties into becoming a better listener, which Carlson identifies as one of the most generous gifts we can offer others, yet one we rarely practice fully because we're too busy thinking about what we'll say next or mentally arguing with what's being said. Moods and mental states. Multiple chapters address how our moods dramatically affect our perception of reality and our ability to think clearly. Carlson warns against making important decisions or judgments when in low moods, because everything appears worse than it actually is when we're feeling down. During these times, problems seem insurmountable. Other people appear more problematic, and our own abilities seem inadequate. But these perceptions are artifacts of our mood rather than accurate assessments of reality. The key is becoming aware of our moods without being fooled by them, recognizing that this too shall pass and that tomorrow, or even an hour from now, things will likely look very different. He suggests simple practices like taking a nap, going for a walk, or deliberately choosing to wait before responding to situations when we're in low moods. Similarly, negative thoughts don't need to be taken so seriously. We can practice ignoring them rather than treating every thought that passes through our minds as important truth, requiring action. Realize the power of your own thoughts. Emphasizes that thoughts create our experience of reality. meaning that changing our thinking literally changes our experience of life even when external circumstances remain constant. This understanding empowers us to take responsibility for our mental states rather than seeing ourselves as victims of circumstances. Relationships and communication. Numerous chapters offer wisdom for improving relationships through simple shifts in behavior and attitude. Carlson emphasizes small practices with big impacts. Not interrupting others or finishing their sentences, which shows respect and allows genuine connection. Looking beyond behavior to see the person beneath actions that may be hurtful or annoying. Imagining people as tiny infants and as 100-year-old adults, which cultivates compassion by reminding us of universal vulnerability, and choosing to be the first to act loving or reach out rather than waiting for others to make the first move. The chapter on taking out the trash when in doubt about whose turn it is illustrates how relationships improve dramatically when we focus on contributing rather than scorekeeping and ensuring perfect fairness. Writing heartfelt letters once a week, telling people what we admire about them, and smiling at strangers while looking into their eyes represent deliberate practices of connection and kindness. Carlson notes that criticism is almost always counterproductive in relationships, creating defensiveness and distance rather than the improvement we hope for. So he suggests resisting the urge to criticize, and instead looking for what we can appreciate. The practice of doing favors without expecting anything in return breaks the transactional mentality that can poison relationships and allows genuine generosity to flourish. Acceptance and surrender. A core theme running through many chapters involves acceptance and surrender as paths to peace rather than passive resignation. Carlson distinguishes between accepting things as they are and giving up on improving them, explaining that acceptance actually provides the clarity and calm needed for effective action, whereas resistance and denial create confusion and stress. Surrender to the fact that life isn't fair acknowledges the truth that life distributes advantages and challenges unequally, but points out that railing against this reality creates suffering without changing it. The teaching to be open to what is means meeting reality as it actually exists, rather than insisting it should be different before we can be at peace. The metaphor, see the glass as already broken, comes from Buddhist teaching that everything is impermanent and will eventually end, so we might as well appreciate things now rather than waiting for perfect conditions. This perspective paradoxically makes us more grateful for what we have rather than bitter about what we lack. Carlson clarifies that acceptance doesn't mean passive tolerance of injustice or abuse, but rather a clear-eyed understanding of reality that allows wise, effective response rather than emotionally driven reaction. The Serenity Prayer captures this wisdom, changing what can be changed, accepting what cannot, and developing wisdom to know the difference. Mindfulness practices and inner work. The book includes numerous practical mindfulness techniques for developing inner peace. Setting aside quiet time every day, even just 5 or 10 minutes, provides an anchor of stillness in busy lives and trains the ability to simply be rather than constantly do. Carlson acknowledges that this feels uncomfortable at first for people accustomed to constant activity, but with practice it becomes a cherished part of the day. Breathing before speaking creates a pause that prevents reactive, hurtful responses we later regret and allows more thoughtful communication. Counting to 10 serves the same purpose, giving emotional intensity time to subside before we respond. The practice of being in the eye of the storm means maintaining inner calm even when circumstances are chaotic. Recognizing that we can't control external events, but we can control our internal responses. Taking up yoga or similar practices provides both physical and mental benefits, while teaching mindfulness through attention to breath and body. Becoming an early riser, while not for everyone, creates quiet morning time before the day's demands begin, allowing centered, intentional start to the day rather than reactive rushing. Quieting the mind through meditation or simple stillness interrupts the constant mental chatter that generates much of our stress and reveals that we are not our thoughts, but the awareness that observes thoughts. Humility in beginner's mind. Imagine that everyone is enlightened except you. Cultivates humility and openness to learning from all people and situations. This perspective means approaching life with a beginner's mind, curious and receptive rather than assuming we already know everything important. Carlson emphasizes practicing humility not from low self-worth, but from secure confidence that doesn't require constant validation through demonstrating superiority. The chapter about arguing for our limitations notes that when we defend our restrictions and problems, insisting, "That's just how I am," we ensure those limitations remain in place, whereas openness to change allows growth. Being willing to learn from friends and family, even when their feedback is uncomfortable, provides opportunities for growth we miss if we're defensive. The practice of reading articles and books with entirely different viewpoints from our own, genuinely trying to learn something rather than just collecting ammunition for our existing beliefs, expands our understanding and reduces the rigid thinking that creates stress. Getting comfortable not knowing. Admitting when we lack knowledge or understanding rather than pretending expertise paradoxically increases real wisdom because it creates space for learning. Gratitude and appreciation. Multiple chapters emphasize gratitude as a fundamental practice for happiness and stress reduction. When we focus on what we have rather than what we want or lack, contentment naturally arises, and the constant sense of deficiency that drives much consumption and stress dissolves. Carlson challenges the assumption that more is better, noting that this belief ensures perpetual dissatisfaction because there's always more to want, more to achieve, more to acquire. Instead, being happy where we are with what we currently have creates peace that accumulation never delivers. Looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary trains attention to notice beauty and wonder in everyday moments rather than waiting for special occasions to feel grateful. Spending a moment every day thinking of someone to thank cultivates an orientation toward appreciation rather than complaint. Being grateful when feeling good and graceful when feeling bad provides an attitude that works in both positive and challenging times. Celebrating good moments without attachment, and moving through difficult ones with dignity. The practice of acknowledging the totality of our being means accepting all aspects of ourselves, including parts we'd rather hide or change, with compassion rather than harsh self-judgment. Simplicity and priorities. Carlson advocates simplifying life by regularly asking what's really important and eliminating or reducing focus on things that don't pass this test. Much of our stress comes from saying yes to too many things and then feeling overwhelmed trying to do them all well. Learning to mind your own business, not getting caught up in others' dramas and choices that don't actually affect you, creates significant stress reduction and frees energy for what actually matters to you. Doing one thing at a time rather than multitasking not only improves the quality of our work, but also our experience of life as full. Presence to any activity makes it more satisfying than distracted partial attention to multiple things simultaneously. The chapter on transforming melodrama into melodrama encourages catching ourselves when we're creating or amplifying drama and consciously choosing a calmer, less reactive response, redefining what constitutes a meaningful accomplishment, perhaps valuing a peaceful morning or a kind interaction as much as professional achievements, shifts priorities toward what actually contributes to life satisfaction. Flexibility with changes in plans reduces stress that comes from rigid expectations, allowing us to flow with life rather than constantly fighting against it when things don't go exactly as planned. Live this day as if it were your last. It might be, reminds readers of life's fragility and unpredictability, encouraging us to live with intention and appreciation rather than postponing what matters until someday. Carlson invites readers to imagine themselves at their own funerals, considering what they hope will be said about them and whether their current priorities align with those values. Remember, 100 years from now, All New People provides perspective on the temporary nature of all our concerns, noting that a century hence all current problems, achievements, and dramas will be forgotten, replaced by entirely new people and concerns. This isn't meant to be depressing, but liberating, freeing us from taking ourselves and our problems too seriously. Tragically, Carlson himself died unexpectedly at age 45. From a pulmonary embolism, giving this wisdom particular poignancy as he didn't get to live a long life, despite his insights about appreciating each day. This reminds us that his teaching wasn't theoretical, but came from genuine understanding that life is precious and uncertain, deserving our full presence and appreciation rather than being wasted on worry about small stuff that ultimately doesn't matter. The book's lasting impact comes from this combination of profound wisdom delivered with humor, humility, and practical specificity, making it accessible to millions while containing genuinely transformative insights. A life philosophy. Don't sweat the small stuff ultimately offers not just stress reduction techniques, but a comprehensive philosophy for living with greater peace, joy, and wisdom. This book totally shifts your outlook on life, helping you trade anxiety for connection and dissatisfaction for appreciation. Actionable suggestions that readers can immediately apply to everyday situations. The book doesn't require believing any particular doctrine or undergoing radical life changes, but rather encourages small shifts in perspective and behavior that accumulate into major transformations in how we experience life. 25 years after publication, the book remains relevant because human nature and the challenges of maintaining peace amidst life's stresses haven't fundamentally changed. If anything, modern technology and culture have accelerated the pace and increased the distractions, making Carlson's wisdom even more necessary. The phrase, "don't sweat the small stuff," has entered common usage, becoming part of cultural vocabulary for reminding ourselves and others to keep things in perspective. The book's enduring popularity testifies to the universality of its insights and the effectiveness of its practical approaches, having helped millions of readers around the world find more peace, reduce stress, and appreciate life more fully. Reading and rereading these chapters, perhaps one each day as many readers do, provides gentle reminders to return to what matters, to respond rather than react. And to remember that in the grand scheme of life, most of what we stress about really is small stuff that doesn't deserve the power we give it over our happiness and well-being. If you found value in this summary, hit the like button, subscribe for more insights, and share it with someone who could benefit from these life-changing principles.